Okay.
So this session, there we go. So this recording will be available after the session, so you can have it to review as well as the slides. And the slides are very content heavy, so you have notes to refer to. So keep that in mind as we're going through them. And welcome to our first Grant 5 webinar. I'm Marcy Mills. I'm the director for Washington State Gear Up. And I'll have our team introduce themselves, but I will start. Annie Pocklington is actually out on maternity leave, and she will return in February. And she is one of our assistant directors, and she is tasked with graduate support services and summer activities. So you'll get to know her later in the year. And Beth Kelly is having technical issues right now. I don't see her back on, but oh, there you are. Go ahead, Beth. I couldn't see you. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Beth Kelly. I manage our website and our resources. So before you recreate the wheel, you can always hit me up and see if I have lesson plans or other ideas or resources or tools for you to use and get started.
And Heather?
Sorry, Feather Wagner, and I'm the budget analyst for Gear Up. I'm always available for any questions you have. Most of my career I've worked in governmental accounting, so I'm a good resource to tap if you have questions, and I'm happy to help.
And Kelly?
Everyone, my name is Kelly Keeney, and I work with your work plan compliance and portal compliance. And the portal is where the data entry is made. So fun times ahead, all. And I'll also be helping in administering the Gear Up Scholarship.
And Roxanne?
Hi, everyone. I'm Roxanne Inchef, and I am the Fiscal and Admin Specialist for Gear Up. I will be helping your staff do all of the reimbursements necessary on A19s and expenditure detail forms. And I also will be doing the one scheduling or being the one scheduling all of the meetings. So you'll be hearing from me a lot. And most recent or soon tomorrow, you'll hear from me about save the date for our upcoming workshops.
Great. All right, and then we are in the process of hiring 2 new positions. One will be an associate director in charge of implementation, and they will provide day-to-day support to your Gear Up teams. And then an associate director for capacity building, and that person will lead our professional development efforts and work directly with your schools to help build college-going culture and sustainability practices. So we're really happy to have all of you here today. Thanks for making the time for this information. So today is really about building a foundation. And so we're going to talk a little bit about contracts, hiring and supervision, reimbursement and match, and data. And so this will give your admin folks some information about how we move forward. And at the end of today's session, we'll have some next steps. So what I want you to keep in mind is that Gear Up is a process. There is a lot to learn. Most of you are brand new to Gear Up. And so the language, the conversation, the requirements is all brand new to you. And so know that we will give this information to you in chunks so you have time to digest and practice, and then we'll refresh and give you another layer of information. So we do have ongoing training throughout the grant cycle. And so we will be offering some in-person trainings on reimbursement and match, and that'll be coming up in November or as soon as you have your Gear Up advisors hired. We have our December work plan and budget meetings coming up. And then, as I said, just ongoing support. We love to make you successful in this endeavor. And so our team's always available, as you heard in their introductions. So just some housekeeping things. As I said, it will be recorded. We'll send the recording and the slides out by tomorrow, if not sooner. It is helpful if you stay muted during the presentation, but anytime that you want to ask a question, feel free to pop it in the chat or use the raise hand feature, because we do want to address your questions throughout this conversation. And then please just stay engaged. There's a lot of detail in this session. So if you can I shut off my email and my Teams for this session, so I don't have those distractions. If you can do the same, that's helpful. And then taking notes, but as I said, it's a pretty wordy slide, so you'll have a lot of information in the slide content. It says, will the directors that I hire be required to live in or near Olympia? I have an amazing person. Well, thank you for thinking about us. No, it is not a requirement that they live in Elma, but there are some travel requirements. So that is posted in the position description. So thanks for thinking of that. We appreciate it. Was there another question in the chat? Okay. Thank you, Mark, for letting us know that. I appreciate it. All right. So just a little bit of background. I know those of you that participated in the admin sessions with us already have this information, but just to make sure everyone in the room is up to speed, gaining early awareness and readiness for undergraduate programs is what Gear Up actually stands for. However, it's not a very accurate acronym anymore because we're much more inclusive. When it was first created, it was all about getting students into four-year colleges and universities. And now we know that the workforce doesn't necessarily require that for all jobs. In Washington, about 70% of jobs do require a post-secondary credential of some sort. So in our efforts, we're much more inclusive. We want students to be able to explore careers in post-secondary education and training that aligns with their chosen pathway. So everything we do is really in support of that. We want to increase the number of students who graduate from high school and go on to post-secondary education and training and succeed there. And so within that, we have 3 national objectives. One is to improve academic performance. So we're always looking at, are they ready for that post-secondary level coursework? Have they taken the rigorous courses needed? Are they doing well in those courses? We want to see increased rates of graduation and lower dropout rates. And then families are a really important part of this process. So we want them to be engaged and we want to support them in navigating this sometimes challenging process so that they're aware of all of the post-secondary options available to their child and they know how to help them prepare. And most importantly, that they understand that there is funding available. So in Washington State, #1 financial aid in the country. There is enough money for all of our students to go to college. And so we want to make sure they know of that and that they know how to apply for scholarships. So you will hear us refer to you as Grant 5 occasionally. So what that means is this is our 5th consecutive grant that we have had from the U.S. Department of Ed. We're very fortunate in Washington to get a new grant every cycle. We've been very blessed in that way. So you're Grant 5, and you'll just hear us talk about that. It's nothing you really need to know, but that's kind of just shorthand for which group of schools are we talking about and which program cycle are we talking about. It is a competitive grant, and it is for 7 years. So this is the first of 7 years. The program will end in September of 2031. We receive $5 million per year from the feds to run this program with our 13 school district partners. We also receive about $1 million per year from our agency in the state to expand those services, which allows us to serve as many schools and students as we are serving in this cycle. We will have a scholarship for eligible students. We haven't had a scholarship in at least 2 grant cycles. Kelly can nod if that's right. And so we'll be working on that and establishing rules and expectations for that. All of the guidance will come out, but we will award our first scholarships next fall. So we're excited to have that to be able to offer to students. And then as a reminder, we will be serving all of the students in grades 7 through 12 and their first year of post-secondary education through this cycle. So every student in your school in those grade bands will be eligible for Gear Up services. And then we will follow them through that first year primarily at Grays Harbor College, Centralia College, and Wenatchee Valley College, but we will also have virtual supports to students outside of those 3 schools. So here's a list of our school partners by county. You can see that we are serving 4 counties with a cluster of schools in each county. And the population there is an estimate. It may or may not be accurate with what you told me last week or with what you have today, but it is just meant to be an approximation. And so you can see where those are located. The schools with the asterisks are mentor schools. So these are schools that have been with us at least through Grant 4, which is the cycle we're just ending. And so they have experienced staff who will be available to support you as well. So if you want a great idea, their Gear Up advisors are great folks to reach out to and contact. And we'll set up some time for you to meet with those folks as well, so you can build those relationships and know what resources they have. But they've been really strong partners. We're very happy that they're continuing with us and can serve in that role. A little bit of background on our evaluation and research. So we are very research heavy in Washington State Gear Up. We really want to know if our services are making a difference and which services are the most impactful. We also are really interested in what's the appropriate dosage that students need in order to really shift their outcomes for post-secondary education and training by the time they leave Gear Up. And so we partner with Vela Institute. They are based in North Carolina, but they have a lot of virtual employees. They are safe and sound. Some are still without power and water, but they're okay, and we're really glad about that. They help monitor our grant goals and objectives and measure our progress each year. They also help us complete our annual performance report, and you'll learn more about that as we get closer to April. They also help us conduct student level surveys periodically, and then the college going culture staff survey that I mentioned to the administrators over the last couple of weeks. We are really lucky to have them as partners. They're seen as a leader in Gear Up evaluation in the country. We also are part of the National Council for Community and Education Partnerships, or NCEP. You'll hear that. It's much easier to say. So NCEP is our national partner. They are the lead advocate for Gear Up programs across the country. They are the ones that help make sure that Congress continues awarding funding, and they make a lot of resources available to us and to you. And so we are part of a longitudinal study of Gear Up services called CCREC, again, another acronym, looking at what activities are the most effective when we're delivering services. And through that work, what we have learned is that family engagement and college visits and financial aid information really has the greatest impact on post-secondary enrollment and financial aid application completion. And so we'll share more of that information as well as time goes on. And then we also partner with the National Student Clearinghouse to get information about post-secondary education and training enrollment. It is unfortunately limited to 2- and 4-year institutions, and not all institutions participate, but we will be working with you to make sure each of your schools has a license with the National Student Clearinghouse so that you can also be getting that data. And actually the data that you can get from the clearinghouse tends to be more accurate than the data I can get because we have different kinds of licenses. So again, something else we'll explain along the way when we're ready to do your work plan and your budget. I'm going to just pause there for a moment. Are there any questions about anything that I've shared so far? Yeah, Steve, that was a typo. So sorry about that. We do, I promise, have the accurate numbers for Okanagan. We just didn't get that. I was supposed to update this slide, I think, on Friday, so I didn't get a chance to do that. In addition to the evaluation work, we also partner with OSPI to collect data from CEDARS. So on a weekly basis, we get a secure file transfer from OSPI of the CEDARS data that you are submitting to OSPI. So you submit it to CEDARS, CEDARS then sends it to us. And in that data set, we get information on all of your students in grades 7 through 12, and that includes their name, their SSID, their birth date, their gender and ethnicity. We get grade level and current enrollment status. We get their enroll and withdraw dates, the withdraw codes, and their attendance. That would be number of days present, number of excused and unexcused absences. We find out if they're in any special services such as ELL, foster care, homeless, or special education. And we get their course enrollment and completion history, so we can see for each term what courses they were enrolled in and whether or not they completed, and the final grade for that course. And so we also have that transcript history and GPA information. All of that information is required for our reporting to the Department of Ed. So it follows all of the guidance for sharing that kind of data with an education entity. So we have a data share agreement in place with OSPI that makes sure that we are using that data appropriately, that we're only collecting what we're required to have. And it's a really good process for us. And then that information actually feeds into our data portal. So the Gear Up portal, or just the portal for shorthand, you'll hear that a lot. So that information shows up there. So we have a place to securely and confidentially retain that data. And then the school level participation data is entered into that system as well. And so within the system, as we have access, we can see both the demographic information for students and how often they're participating in Gear Up activities, including their family members, and what kinds of activities they are participating in. And so all of that information is used for our annual reporting to the Department of Ed, as well as our own evaluation and research. I'm going to shift gears to hiring now. I'll just pause one more time to make sure there aren't any questions on what we've covered so far. All right, great. So we want you to hire staff. And on Friday, I sent out an email to each administrative team, letting them know what we recommend for hiring. And so that included the positions and the FTE and the job descriptions for those roles. So you have that to review and consider. I hope you had a chance to do that prior to this meeting, but if you didn't, completely okay, there's still time. So the FTE is based on the student population, and that's the correct numbers of student population. And a minimum of 1.0 FTE is required regardless of your population. And then the FTE is scaled as the student population grows. So you all have that information in your inbox. If for some reason you missed it or I missed putting you on that list, please let me know and I'm happy to resend that. And then it's up to the district to decide if any of those positions are certified or if they're classified. And it just should be in line with what you would normally do for similar positions in your district. Keep that in mind. But that is a decision that you'll be making over the next couple of weeks, and I'll remind you about that at the end of this session. So the sample job descriptions included one for Gear Up advisors, and that can be all encompassing. So if you have a 1.0 FTE, your Gear Up advisor is going to be tasked with family engagement, student and family direct services, and the data and admin support that's needed for the program. So that data entry we were talking about, the match collection that you'll learn about later. So if you have a 1 FTE, that person takes care of all of those tasks. But as the population grows, so some of you had a 1.2 FTE. And so I may have recommended that you have a 1.0 Gear Up advisor that also is tasked with family engagement, but maybe a 0.2 person to support data and administrative support, kind of clerical support. And so again, that's a recommendation. If you think, oh, I think this plan would work better in my district, please come back to me and have a conversation about that. So if you think a different staffing configuration would work better to meet the needs of your students and families, let's discuss it. So none of that is set in stone at this time. It is a recommendation, but I'm happy to chat about it. And then as you're posting, it is really important to us, to our program, in our own hiring, but also for you, that we hire for diversity. And what that means is that we really want the Gear Up advisors and other staff to reflect the community that we're serving. So what does the demographic look like? What's the lived experience in that community? Sometimes what's the low income percentage population? So we want to take that all into consideration and make sure that Gear Up staff really reflect that and have similar lived experiences. If you want some support around that, I'm happy to chat about that as well. You'll also need to determine who will be the supervisors and lead administrators for Gear Up in your district. So I'll have a description of the lead administrator here in just a minute, but keep in mind these are your employees. You are hiring them. You will supervise them. You will pay them. We will reimburse you for those costs, of course, but your pay scales, your policies all apply, and you will evaluate them and align them with existing positions. So I use this extreme example. If you would normally hire someone to do similar work and pay them $25,000 a year, you can't say, oh, we have a lot of Gear Up money, so we're going to pay them $150,000 a year. You can't really do that. It does need to be aligned. And again, that's something I can discuss with you one-on-one if that's a question you have. Any questions about that process so far? You've seen examples of Gear Up staff being hired as non-reps. I will just say that's a little out of my scope to know that information. I think it has happened, but because they're school district employees, I kind of stay out of that business. So I'm not sure. If that's something you'd like me to research, I'm happy to do that. Just let me know, Jennifer. Right. So lead administrator, this person is tasked with the Gear Up team leadership. So in our conversations over the last couple of weeks, we've talked about the importance of having a strong Gear Up team and how that really supports successful implementation. So this person or persons, if you have two buildings possibly, will be tasked with being the lead of those conversations. They'll oversee the planning and guidance. But as I said, our implementation staff will provide the day-to-day support for implementation. They will help Gear Up have access to district and building resources like the calendar and how to schedule a bus and making sure that information is available. Making sure that Gear Up is aligning with school and district priorities in your strategic action plan. Being able to communicate staff participation expectations. So match collection is coming, and it does require documentation and participation from all of the staff in your building. So we need administrator support to make sure that that's happening. Then if you want staff to participate in Gear Up activities, that's the lead administrator's role to just make sure that expectation is clear. And then of course, supervising and evaluating the employee. We also need the lead administrator or administrators to attend our events, and that will include the quarterly regional roundtables. We talked about those in our sessions, maybe up to 6 hours per year. Participate in our annual site visits. There will definitely be a minimum of 1 in-person site visit per year, and it takes about 2 to 3 in-person hours. We might have some additional site visits virtually that are typically shorter. And then our virtual and in-person workshops. And the first one will be those December workshops to participate in the work plan and budget development and for 24-25 academic year. And that'll be 1.5 days. We typically do that in the spring. So we'll also this year have one in the spring to prepare for the 25-26 school year. And then we'll have a June virtual work plan and budget review meeting. And we'll also have one of those in December once your work plan for this year is complete. So those are the main expectations. And again, we'll want you to assign 1 or 2 lead administrators for your school district. Any questions about those responsibilities? Okay. All right, so the timeline for hiring staff. We would like you to post positions as soon as the contracts are signed. Feather is responsible for putting those contracts out. We hope to have them out the week of the 21st, but we do need some information from you before we can do that. So again, I'll remind you of those tasks at the end of the session. The first employment start date will be the first date of your contract effective date, and that's November 1st. So the employment start date will be November 1 if you hired already, or later based on the hire date. And then we anticipate being able to start providing services January 1. So November and December will be pretty full with getting settled in, developing the work plan, and some training that we will be providing. So for the hiring approval process, you do need to send me the job posting for review, and then I'll approve that. And then once you've selected a final candidate, you'll send me that person's resume, maybe their application as well, and a recommendation, so a statement about why you're recommending that they fill the position. And then email that to me, and I'll get back to you with that approval, or maybe some questions first. But both the job description and the final hiring does require my approval. I'm not looking to like it's your candidates or anything. We just want to be involved in the process. So as I mentioned, there will be some training, and I want to go over the commitment or the contract period for those staff. So we will be providing both online and virtual training. We'll have that schedule available toward the end of October, but plan on your staff participating fully in that, and we'll kind of be in charge of their schedule for just a little bit. And then Roxanne will be coming out to your district to do some in-person training related to fiscal responsibilities. The commitment for the contracts is 190 days for most people. In the email I sent or in the job descriptions I sent, I did have some positions could be 180 or 185, but all Gear Up advisors should have a 190-day contract. That would include the 180 school days and 10 summer days. We recommend 3 days in June, 3 days in July, and 4 days in August. We typically have a back to school kickoff session in August, so that's why more days are required. But that is what we will fund, that number of days. And it's really important that you make those expectations for summer clear. So we are providing support to all of our students as they transition from high school to post-secondary education. So being available to students over the summer is required for this position. So I find that schools are very used to working 180 days, and a lot of folks like to work at schools because it's 180 days. So extra important that you communicate. These are not 180-day jobs. They actually require a lot of flexibility because there are evening events, field trips that are sometimes overnight, summer camps that might be 3 to 4 days long. We have a conference in the summer as well that sometimes our folks attend. And then of course that student and family support over the summer. So we want to make sure people are really clear about what they're signing up for, and they understand that needs to be built into their schedule. It really is 100% Gear Up commitment. And so please pay attention to that. So all of their time that's paid by Gear Up does need to be working on Gear Up. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. And so we also have time and effort forms required. So if you have any other federal funds in your district, you're probably very used to doing time and effort forms. They look a lot like a timesheet for those federally funded staff. But if that's something that's new to you, please reach out to us so we can explain that process and that requirement. And then I also recommend that you post these as grant funded positions through 2031. If they're not posted that way, then you may be on the hook to get that person a job at the end of the grant cycle. So just be considering that in that posting. So we can commit to 7 years. We know that we have funding for 7 years. Of course, wild things can happen and the department could cut our funding. So we get annual notification that our funding is renewed. So we feel very confident in that. But in all of our postings, we say that this is a grant funded position, that it is renewable every year, but we do anticipate having funding through 2031. So consider whether or not that language is important to you and how that might be presented to applicants. All right, pausing for a couple of questions. Do we need to do this process if we are returning Gear Up participants and already have staff in place? No, so North Beach has staff in place. Actually, everyone has staff in place if you're returning. Your FTE requirement might actually be different. So I know I have at least two districts that I recommended a different FTE for staff than they currently have. All right. Any other questions? All right, just a couple of other notes on hiring staff. So I know, especially in these small rural districts, getting coaches can be difficult. Sometimes folks like to combine Gear Up with a coaching position. I actually do not recommend that, primarily because Gear Up has evening and sometimes weekend and field trip expectations that keep them beyond a school day, and sometimes overnight trips. And those cannot be paused for a sports season. So keep that in mind. We can't put Gear Up on hold because it's basketball season. Also, all hours must be spent in Gear Up, as I said on the previous slide. So I know I've worked in a school district, very common during coaches season. I kind of know what happens there and how much time gets spent on coaching responsibilities, and they often have early release. So we can't pay for that early release time. It's a very normal thing in basic ed funding to do that, but Gear Up cannot do that. So in the event that you do have a coach in a position, that early release time needs to be covered by other funds or just cannot be a paid time for Gear Up staff. If you do need to hire someone as a coach that is also Gear Up, please let me know. We need to have a conversation about that before that decision is made. Also, Gear Up staff cannot substitute during the workday. So again, goes back to all of their time needs to be 100% Gear Up. You also can't assign them things like lunch duty or similar responsibilities. So they can be in the lunchroom if they're providing Gear Up services, but they can't actually be on lunch duty. Fine line maybe, but and then if staff take a vacation or on leave for more than 2 consecutive days, we ask that you notify us so that we're aware, so that we aren't wondering why people aren't getting back to us, so the implementation coach knows what might need to be covered during that time. Any questions about those details? All right. I know that budget folks like to know this, so our CFDA number is listed here, 84.334, and your first contract cycle will be November 1 to August 31, just for this year only. After this year, it will always be September 1 to August 31. And then we have the federal restricted indirect rate that's published by OSPI. That's the allowable indirect rate on these funds up to 8%. So I think we only have one school that exceeds 8% this year. And so you can collect that amount for your district based on actual expenditures, or you can contribute that amount as match, which we encourage. If you don't need that funding, then we do suggest you just let us collect that as match. You actually don't need to do anything at all. If you make that decision, we calculate it for you every month. Easiest match on the planet. You'll also need to determine who is going to oversee approving purchases. Will you have a Gear Up credit card, for example, or will you require purchase orders? So thinking about the system that needs to be in place and the process, because you will get some funding based on your per student population. And so you'll need to have those account codes in place and that accounting structure ready to go when your contract is signed. I have a question about, we have an intervention time 4 days a week for all middle school students 6 through 8. Can they help coordinate this? I think that is probably doable. 6th grade is out of our scope of service. So I'd need to know a little bit more about what coordination entails. So I'm going to say probably, but it depends. So just reach out to me separately, Dorinda, and we can definitely chat about that. Once you have the work plan in place and the contract is signed, we do allow revisions. We know new ideas come up, or maybe a plan didn't quite go as you thought it would, and you need to make an adjustment. So you can do revisions 3 times a year. This year, probably not December because that's when we'll be signing off on them, but March and June, you'll be able to submit revisions for approval. So you can move money around, you can add activities. Sometimes you'll need to delete activities or just revise them. So keep that in mind too. The work plan we'll develop in December is our best effort for what we know is true right now. All right. So I'm going to go into a little more detail about the students to be served. Again, it's all students in grades 7 through 12 and your graduates through their first year of post-secondary education. So some of you, we've talked about some of these things, but just to review, if you have an alternative school or program in your district that encompasses those grade levels, you may serve them with Gear Up, completely allowable. So that's a conversation to have about how will those students be included or not. And then how will you serve Running Start students, both those who are on your campus part-time and those who are full-time off campus and their families. So one of our successful practices in the last cycle was that the Gear Up advisor actually went out to the college campus nearest them about once a month or once every other month to meet with Running Start students, make sure they know about financial aid, make sure that they need to apply, making sure they're still connected to the school to meet the graduation requirements and those pieces. So that is possible. Those can also be virtual events, not necessarily in person. And then will you serve students and families who are primarily homeschooled? So we know sometimes students are full-time homeschooled, but then others come in for maybe band or sports or just a course or two. So thinking about, will those students be part of your Gear Up student population or not? Both are allowable. And then do you have students in an Open Doors program? And will those students and families be served or not? We find that most of the time that's a no, but it is possible to also serve them. So we can talk about that and how that might happen. At a minimum, we have quarterly newsletters, and those can always go out to all of these populations. It's free, you can email them out. They're electronically available. And so we will have a verification process for your school to go through to just make sure the students that we are calling Gear Up students are the students that are identified in our data system. So Kelly leads that process and she'll be checking in with you and providing those instructions when we're ready to do that, probably not until January. Any questions about those kind of nuances about who Gear Up students are? So grant management. So as I've shared previously, this grant has a lot of changes for us in how we're serving students in the student model. And so that's requiring us to change a lot of our documentation. And so currently on the site, on our website, which is gearup.wa.gov, we have a grant management manual. Please, at this time, do not refer to that manual. It's outdated, but we have Grant 4 schools that still need to use it, so that's why it's still up and running. We will have the new manual fully available by November 1. And then with our Gear Up folks, we will make sure that we provide training to them so they know how to use that. It will also be part of our fiscal responsibility training. So stay tuned, it's coming. We're all working really hard to get those materials ready as soon as possible. When it comes to documentation requirements, and again, this will all be part of that fiscal management training that Roxanne and Feather will be providing. For your expenses, we typically require a transaction recap and a detailed receipt for all expenditures. We don't need any other documentation. We don't want your vouchers. We don't want your purchase orders, any other documentation that the district might have for that expense. We just want the detailed receipt and that recap that backs up that you've paid for that expense. And then any travel or expense reimbursement forms for staff, time and effort forms, as I said earlier. And then we have forms called an A19 invoice and an expenditure detail form. And everything that you spend gets summarized on those forms. And then all of that gets submitted to us monthly. And we'll explain that in a little bit as well. For match documentation, there are two different kinds of match. One is the match based on staff time. So there are lots of ways that your existing staff outside of Gear Up can provide match contributions to the program. And we will provide a full training just on match. So I'm not going to cover that today, but we'll do that in a webinar. And then you can have goods and services. Goods and services might be donations that other organizations give you. It might be a grant that the district receives that to support similar work or to support CCR, or maybe it supports math instruction. And so all of those are possible because they do support getting our students to reach the goals that we have for them. And that's all submitted on those forms with a monthly match summary. And again, we're going to provide training. I just wanted you to know there's some match documentation required. And then all of our activities are documented on sign-in sheets. So anytime a student or family member or staff member participates in a Gear Up activity, that's documented. You've all heard, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. And so we really mean that in Gear Up. We are pretty documentation heavy, so we can be accountable to the feds and so that we can be audit proof. So again, something we'll be providing training on to your Gear Up advisors and others. So included in that documentation are agendas or lesson plans, field trip itineraries, college visit itineraries, and then the portal entry that Kelly mentioned when she introduced herself. Looks like we have a question. You're going to be sending this slide deck to everyone after this meeting. Yes, you will both get the slide deck and a recording of this session. So that's why it is so content heavy, because I wanted you to be able to use it as notes. Thanks for checking. All right, then earlier I mentioned the graduate support services. So we really want to make sure that students have the support they need over the summer after graduation and through that next academic year to be successful in that post-secondary pathway they've chosen. So it's a full year of support from us. It is part of your contract that your Gear Up staff provide that support. And so one of the things that I'd like you to think about is what system in place do you need so that you can use grant funds to support activities and students after they've graduated. Most of that will be over the summer, but some of it might be in the academic year following graduation. We understand that sometimes spending district funds on graduates can be challenging. So keep in mind, this is an expectation and a contractual obligation of having a Gear Up grant. If you'd like to discuss that, I'm happy to do that. But some of the activities might be including getting students onto that post-secondary campus for an orientation. Sometimes it's helping them move in. It might be travel costs. There are also ways for us to pay families to do that, but we need to be able to reimburse them for that. And then any staff support that's needed for that time. So we need to know that your Gear Up advisors can provide that support throughout the year, even though the students have graduated. So be thinking about that. It's a little bit different than how you normally operate. So this is a reimbursement model. So we will give you your full funding amount when you have your contract. I've given estimates of those amounts to superintendents and principals already, but we will have that final amount when we sign your contract. And then we will reimburse you monthly for the month's previous expenses. So in December, you'll submit November expenses to us, for example. And those are due on the 25th of each month. So November's expenses, you have until December 25th, Merry Christmas, to get those to us. You can always get them in early. We know vacation comes around that time, but that is the timing of that process. We reimburse fairly quickly. So you will have a reimbursement in less than a month for sure. Often it's more like 10 to 15 days. So we do have a quick turnaround on that process. And we will be submitting all of that documentation electronically through Box. If you have not used Box before, it is a secure method. It's a state-approved secure method for transferring documents and information, and we will set up those accounts for you. It works almost the same as Dropbox if you've used that before. It's a very simple system, and we'll have it all in place and give you the information to join that Box account so you have access. If you are one of the, I think, 5 schools going to Gear Up West in October, you will be able to submit those expenses to us in November. And we know you don't know how to do that yet. So Roxanne will be working with you to make sure you have the information you need to get those to us. I will just say right now, if you're going to Gear Up West, keep every single receipt except for food. You don't need to keep food receipts. But keep all of the receipts. They need to say what was purchased, when it was purchased, all of that. And then we think that we successfully collected everyone's name and email address that is responsible for fiscal tasks in the district. But if you want to be sure, if you're the person responsible for that at the district or building level, please send your contact information to Roxanne, and her email is here, and it really is 2 E's at the end. All right, any questions about the reimbursement process? All right, so the required fiscal training that I keep mentioning. So again, that will be in person with WASAC staff. At least Roxanne and Feather will be coming out. I may also join them. And then we want in your district to show up. It will be all of your Gear Up paid staff, and then the district or building fiscal staff that will be tasked with this responsibility. So it is the district's responsibility to put together that reimbursement paperwork each month and collect all of that. They will do that in partnership with the Gear Up advisors, however. And then we will come to your school to provide that, ideally sometime in November, but it will depend on when you get your staff hired, and Roxanne will be reaching out to you to schedule that. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a Gear Up website. It is shown here, and we are in the process. Beth is leading a huge overhaul to that site. It's going to be amazing when it's done, and we expect to launch that no later than November, so watch for that. But if you go visit it now, you will find that we have a lot of resources for students and families, as well as educators. Our site is used not only by Gear Up folks, but by other school districts in the state and actually across the country. So feel free to get on there and find any of those resources. I heard already from folks that they're using some of those things, which is very exciting. But it'll have a great new look coming November. And then we have a Tuesday bulletin that at this point, most of you, if not all of you, are receiving that. We will update our distribution list for Tuesday's bulletin next week. And it really is the essential resource for you. So Beth puts that together, and the very top of that bulletin gives you any deadlines that are coming up or things that you really have to know for Gear Up. So we know you're busy. At a minimum, you should look at every Tuesday's bulletin just to see what's on top, so you know if there's any task or thing that you need to complete, and the deadline will be there. But we hope that you'll also use it to find other professional development. There's always a scholarship listing there. Other student events are provided there as well to give you ideas about things you might want to do with your Gear Up folks. And so please check on that. And if you're not getting that email, you can email Beth Kelly to get onto that list. And then we also have Facebook and Instagram and even YouTube. So feel free to follow us on those social channels. Our next Pro Dev event will be in December. So Lewis, Grays Harbor, and Rochester will be joining us at ESD 113 on December 2nd and 3rd. That will be a full day on the 2nd and a little over a half a day on the 3rd. And then we'll be in Chelan for Okanagan and Chelan counties on December 10th and 11th. Again, same pattern, long day on the 10th, longer half day on the 11th. And required to attend are the lead administrators and Gear Up paid staff. So they must be there. And then we are always happy to have more people in the room to help with the planning process. So again, we'll be developing a work plan and a budget. On those days, we'll give you all of the guidance you need in order to do that. And so it's very helpful sometimes to have advisors or counselors or other folks who will likely partner with Gear Up, like your migrant ed folks, or avid teachers, people like that. So having them there to help plan those activities is very helpful. You will not finish your plan in that day and a half. So then you'll take it back to school finish working on it in December, wrap it up, and then we'll schedule virtual sessions to review that work plan with you to make sure that it's complete and that we all understand what it says and that the expenditures are all allowable. So Roxanne, as she said earlier, will be sending out a save the date that session. We do need you to share it with other folks that you'd like to include, and then full registration and event information will go out probably in early November, if not sooner. Any questions about participating in those events? Okay. All right, so here are your next steps. So please review the job descriptions document that we sent on Friday. It came from my email, as well as the recommended FTE, and decide what positions you need to hire. Will it be a Gear Up advisor only, or some combination of a Gear Up advisor, graduation specialist, and data or administrative support person? What positions will be certified, if any, and what will be classified? What is the mid-range salary and benefits for the required number of contracts? I'm sorry, I must be done with this webinar. My words are going. For the required contract days. If you want some clarification about that, please reach out. And then when you're ready, send the job description or posting to me with the classification assignment and the budget needed. And there's my email. And we'd like to have that from you no later than October 21st. And then I will send that email approval to you. Then you'll be able to post for an 11/1 hire date or later based on that process for you and if you can find candidates. We discussed this at length, I think, in most of our sessions with you already, but we really want to make sure that you're hiring for well-qualified people. We don't just want to fill positions because we need to fill them. So it's okay if it takes some time. We know that that might be necessary. This is a weird time to hire people at school. So we want to make sure you get the greatest candidate pool possible and that you get the right people in the positions. And then prior to actually making the final offer to your candidates, please send me the resume and a summary of why you're recommending that they be hired. I'll review that, ask questions if needed, and then send you approval for that hire. And then in preparation for contracts, Feather will need to know if your district wants to be reimbursed for the indirect rate or if you want to use it as match. So you can email that to her also by October 21st. As soon as we get all that information for you, we will be able to put together contracts. They will be sent to you via DocuSign. So we'll get those signed electronically by superintendents, and then I'm the other signer, and we'll get those done as quickly as possible. Okay, so a question about a 0.2 FTE. What's the 0.2 based on? Is it 8 hours per day employees or something else? So I would say count it in the way your district would normally count it. So I think of it as an 8-hour day. So a 0.2 is kind of the equivalent of 1 day a week. And so for us, that's usually 8 hours. And so when you have a 0.2, you can do a variety of things. You can add that on to an existing staff member that has 0.2 available in their work schedule, or you can make it a separate position. So both are possible. Again, just following whatever practices you would normally practice for a 0.2 position in your district. Our lead administrators. Oh, okay. So someone asked if we can pay stipends to lead administrators. So no, we don't pay lead administrators. We do count all of their time as match, and administrator time counts up quickly for match. So it does get documented as your match contribution. So we do not pay administrators for that role. Any other questions? Do Gear Up positions count toward retirement systems? So yes, as your employees, they would be included in whatever retirement system they are eligible for in your district. And the years of service count. And then a question about match. Are you going to do a training on match? Yes, match is big. Match is a big conversation and there are a lot of details to it. So we will do a completely separate webinar on match, probably in November. So for November, I'm not expecting that you have any match documentation. However, I would suggest strongly that you start documenting anytime you're spending on Gear Up because we can use it. So even the meetings we had over the last couple of weeks, anytime you've spent in your building talking about Gear Up, planning for Gear Up, start just jotting down your time. We'll put it on the right form at a later date. But administrator time is very valuable to the project and does add up quickly. And it's sometimes the best source of match in your district. So please start keeping track of it and we'll go back and gather October and November match as soon as we get that match completed. Thanks for that question. I appreciate it.
Marcy, I think that we might be able to create like a cheat sheet or a handout as well as part of the training of common and acceptable sources, right? So,
Yes.
okay.
Yes, absolutely. And the other thing that we will do is we will go through your plan and have a conversation with each of you in as a school to talk about what are, I call them match opportunities. What are the match opportunities in your district? So what other grants are you getting? What scholarships do students receive? What teacher time might be able to count? What other programs do you have that are doing similar work that we can count? So we will help you figure that out. And so a couple of you are saying it's really hard to know if we want to take our indirect or count it as match when you don't know more about match. Noted. I completely understand that. Here's my comment about that. The match rate will be somewhere between 50 and 75% of your grant award. It's a chunk of change. So if your district does not need the indirect to function, to balance your budget, to pay for, offset that cost of district staff being involved in Gear Up, then I would definitely recommend that you say count it as match. Now, you can count it as match this year, and if next year you say, oh my gosh, we can't do that anymore, you can change next year to collecting it. That's entirely possible, and vice versa. If you want to collect it this year, figure out next year that you don't really need that funding, you can switch to match. And that's a decision that you can make on an annual basis. So when you know your budget, I think I gave all of you a rough estimate of what your budget would be in our meetings, then you can calculate what that match would be. I have it calculated already. If you just want to have an email exchange or a phone conversation about that, maybe some more conversation about that would help. I'm happy to do so. All right, any final questions? All right, well, here's the contact information for the things that we talked about today. So you can contact me about any of it. As we said earlier, Roxanne's really involved in the reimbursement process, event logistics, helping you track your budget and travel and event planning. So feel free to reach out to her at any time. And then Feather is our budget analyst, and she'll be leading the contracts and amendments and any work plan and budget revisions, and also helping track the match documentation. So again, please reach out to any of us if you have questions about any of those items, and we'll be happy to help. Thank you for making the time to join us today. Again, we recognize this big chunk of time is a big ask. So thank you, and we look forward to getting through these next steps and getting Gear Up staff in place. Thank you. You can stop the recording, Roxanne. I'll hang out here just in case anyone has questions. I just want to